At exactly 1:45 in the morning, the steady, reliable pulse of a household internet router abruptly goes completely dark. 45 minutes later, at precisely 2:30 in the morning, a medical pacemaker beating steadily inside the chest of an 84-year-old woman permanently ceases syncing its vital, life-saving data to the cloud. These are not random technical glitches or temporary power outages caused by a passing storm. They are the precise, chilling digital footprints of an unseen predator executing a flawless, terrifying isolation protocol. In our modern, hyper-connected era, we leave invisible trails of data with every breath we take, every step we make, and every beat of our hearts. But what happens when those vital digital trails are intentionally, surgically severed in the dead of the night? The sudden, total absence of data rapidly becomes the most terrifying and undeniable evidence of all. It is the final, desperate heartbeat registered on a remote, cold server before the entire system is plunged into absolute, impenetrable digital silence. When law enforcement eventually arrived at the scene, they found an impossible puzzle. There were no shattered windows scattering glass across the floor. There were no splintered door frames indicating a violent, forced entry. There was only a quiet, perfectly undisturbed neighborhood and a profound mystery that would soon consume federal investigators and captivate the nation. How does a human being simply vanish into thin air from inside a secured, locked fortress without triggering a single alarm or leaving a trace of a struggle inside the home? This is the exact, terrifying question we are going to meticulously unravel today. Internet rumors do not solve complex cases. Concrete evidence does. If you want to cut through the deafening noise of social media speculation and follow the actual, verified forensics, subscribe to True Crime with Liam and let us analyze the undeniable facts together. We are diving deep into the digital forensics and the glaring physical anomalies of a high-profile case that has completely baffled seasoned experts, terrified a quiet community, and left a powerful family desperate for answers. When a digital lifeline is violently cut, the countdown to tragedy immediately begins. The profound silence left behind is deafening, speaking volumes about the deeply calculated nature of the intrusion. We must look far, beyond the obvious, and closely examine the dark spaces between the disconnected data points. Before that terrifying digital silence descended, there was a quiet, highly structured, and deeply comforting routine. Nancy Guthrie was 84 years old. She lived alone in a peaceful, seemingly secure neighborhood, relying heavily on a strict regimen of daily medications to maintain her physical health and her sharp clarity of mind. Despite her advanced age, she was entirely mentally sharp, fully aware of her surroundings, and meticulously maintained her daily schedule without fail. But Nancy was not just a random, vulnerable target selected by a desperate, opportunistic criminal looking for quick cash or pawnable valuables. She was the beloved mother of Savannah Guthrie, one of the most prominent, recognizable, and powerful television personalities broadcasting in the United States today. This single, undeniable fact instantly and dramatically elevates the overall threat level of the entire situation. It transforms a quiet, unassuming suburban home into a high-stakes environment fraught with unseen dangers. A woman intimately connected with this extraordinary level of high-profile, national public attention is acutely aware of the necessity for personal security. Her daily life was a carefully curated rhythm of quiet, private moments, intentionally shielded from the blinding, relentless glare of her daughter's massive public life. On the bitterly cold evening of January 31st, that peaceful, protective rhythm played out for the very final time. At exactly 9:50 at night, her devoted son-in-law, Tommaso Cioni, pulled his vehicle up to the quiet house. They had just shared a pleasant, ordinary dinner together. He carefully walked her to the front door, ensuring she was safely, securely inside her personal sanctuary before he departed. He stood in the driveway and watched closely as the heavy, solid garage door slowly and deliberately descended, effectively sealing off the dangerous outside world from her safe haven. The mechanical system locked into place with a definitive, reassuring thud. To anyone casually watching from the street, it was simply the end of another completely ordinary day. It was just an elderly woman returning to the quiet safety of her private home for the night. But that heavy, impenetrable wooden door did not keep the lurking danger out. Instead, It tragically locked the unsuspecting victim inside, with the unknown. The house, structurally designed to be a protective, impenetrable shell against the world, was rapidly about to become a perfectly isolated, inescapable trap. An 84-year-old woman, entirely dependent on her established daily routine and her vital medical devices, was now completely, terrifyingly cut off from the outside world. The quiet, still calm of the night settled heavily over the dark neighborhood, providing a false, deceptive peace that heavily masked a horrific, unfolding reality. Someone had been patiently, silently waiting in the shadows for that heavy garage door to close. The terrifying, invisible countdown had already begun ticking away. The very walls meant to provide comfort were transforming into a silent prison. As the neighborhood slept, unaware of the nightmare, the digital monitors inside continued their silent vigil. They were the only witnesses to the final hours of normalcy. The stark contrast between the warm dinner she shared with her son-in-law and the cold isolation about to surround her is profoundly disturbing. She required daily medications to maintain her health, making any disruption to her routine a potentially lethal event. The complete isolation of an 84-year-old woman, trapped in a house being systematically severed from the outside world, creates a scenario of unimaginable vulnerability. The absolute stillness of the house was not a sign of peace, but rather the heavy quiet before a devastating, unseen storm. The comforting illusion of neighborhood safety violently shattered the following day at exactly 12 noon. Nancy was consistently scheduled to attend her regular Sunday church service through an online platform, a deeply important virtual gathering she absolutely never missed under any circumstances. When she completely failed to log into the system, the sudden absence was immediate, highly unusual, and glaringly obvious. The silent, digital void she left behind on the church roster was the very first physical, undeniable sign that her strict daily routine had been catastrophically broken. Her family, intimately and thoroughly familiar with her unwavering, meticulous habits, felt an instant, terrifying surge of panic. They frantically hurried to her home, desperately expecting to find perhaps a sudden medical emergency, a severe physical fall, or even a simple, harmless misplacement of her mobile phone. Instead, they were greeted by an empty, chillingly quiet house, echoing with absolute silence. There was absolutely no sign of Nancy anywhere inside the residence. There was no hastily scribbled note left on the kitchen counter. There was no physical indication of a sudden, voluntary departure. The mounting panic quickly escalated into a frantic, desperate call to the 911 emergency dispatch center. Local law enforcement officers promptly arrived on the scene, systematically sweeping the entire property for any visible signs of a violent disturbance or a forced entry. What the responding officers ultimately found completely defied all standard logic and contradicted all routine. Investigative procedures. There were absolutely no visible signs of forced entry anywhere on the perimeter. The fragile glass windows were fully intact and undisturbed. The heavy deadbolt locks on the exterior doors remained entirely uncompromised and securely fastened from the inside. Yet, right there on the concrete surface of the front porch, located perilously close to the main entrance, lay a deeply chilling, horrific contradiction to the seemingly secure, impenetrable perimeter of the house. A distinct, terrifying trail of fresh blood permanently stained the cold concrete surface. Highly trained forensic evidence teams quickly descended upon the disturbing scene, meticulously collecting the biological samples with extreme care to preserve the integrity of the evidence. Subsequent laboratory DNA testing later provided the absolutely devastating, undeniable confirmation that the investigators dreaded. The blood found outside the locked door positively belonged to Nancy Guthrie. The very foundational premise of the entire criminal investigation was immediately and violently thrown into absolute chaos. If the heavy exterior doors were securely locked from the inside, and absolutely no fragile glass windows were broken or tampered with, how in the world did the elderly victim's blood end up pooling on the outside of the securely locked house? The pristine, untouched condition of the physical entry points strongly suggested a completely impossible, paradoxical scenario. Did the cautious 84-year-old woman willingly open her front door in the dead of the freezing night for someone she intimately recognized and implicitly trusted? Or did a sophisticated, invisible phantom simply manage to walk directly through the solid walls of the residence? The The disturbing presence of the blood on the exterior porch practically screamed of a sudden, violent, and messy confrontation, yet the perfectly intact interior locks quietly whispered a terrifyingly different story of a silent, highly coordinated, and completely seamless physical extraction. The contradiction is maddening. The investigators were forced to stare at a pristine front door, completely devoid of the chaotic scratches, the violently splintered wood, or the hastily manipulated hardware that universally define a standard home invasion. They stood on the porch, staring down at the crimson evidence of a violent struggle, while leaning against a door that firmly insisted no such struggle had ever breached its threshold. This massive discrepancy between the biological evidence left outside and the structural integrity maintained inside immediately elevated the case from a standard missing persons inquiry to a complex, seemingly impossible puzzle. The sheer physics of the crime scene made absolutely no logical sense. It forced the authorities to completely abandon their traditional theories of random neighborhood burglaries and immediately begin considering significantly darker, far more complex, and deeply terrifying possibilities regarding how she was taken. The crucial answer to the seemingly impossible lock-to-choke extraction ultimately lay deeply hidden within the silent, unblinking digital eyes that constantly watch over the quiet neighborhood. Federal Bureau of Investigation agents, officially taking over the complex digital forensics portion of the inquiry, successfully pulled crucial video footage from a nearby residential Nest security camera. The recovered video file was heavily degraded and grainy, shot entirely in the low, unforgiving light of the early morning hours. But the absolute nightmare it clearly captured was crystal clear and deeply disturbing. A solitary, ominous figure moved deliberately and silently through the deep shadows surrounding the property. It was definitely a man, standing roughly 5'9" to 5'10" tall, presenting with a completely average, physically unremarkable build that would easily blend into any crowd. But his specific choice of attire was anything but ordinary or casual. His face was entirely and deliberately concealed behind a dark mask, effectively stripping away any recognizable identifying facial features. Slung heavily over his right shoulder was an Ozark trail hiker backpack, a highly common, generic item frequently sold at Walmart, specifically designed to be utterly unremarkable and blend in seamlessly anywhere. Most terrifying and alarming of all was the distinct, undeniable shape of a tactical gun holster securely strapped to his side. He moved with a chilling, practiced purpose, slowly lingering just outside the immediate threshold of the quiet home. This was absolutely not a chaotic, drug-fueled, desperate break-in executed by an amateur. According to seasoned criminal behavior experts and strict federal law enforcement definitions, the menacing presence of the tactical gear, the deliberately concealed identity, and the highly targeted, patient nature of the physical approach all pointed directly to one horrifying, inescapable conclusion. This was a highly organized, professionally executed abduction. A standard, botched burglary typically involves the chaotic sounds of shattered glass, desperately ransacked bedroom drawers, and a panicked, clumsy flight from the scene. This masked man was entirely different. He was coldly calculated, incredibly patient, and clearly equipped for a highly specific, dangerous mission. He had meticulously mapped out the camera blind spots. He had accurately anticipated and defeated the digital network defenses. He moved smoothly through the night like a ghost, completely comfortable and deeply familiar with the terrifying, suffocating silence he had intentionally created. But even the most prepared ghosts inevitably make critical mistakes in the unforgiving physical world. In the midst of his meticulous, obsessive planning, amidst the forcefully severed internet network connections and the skillfully disabled digital alarms, the masked figure committed a single, catastrophic error. He carelessly left something tangible behind in the dark, a piece of physical, biological evidence so profoundly personal and undeniable that it holds the immense power to completely unravel his entire, carefully constructed phantom identity. If you are captivated by the meticulous, scientific process of breaking down a complex crime scene and uncovering the deeply hidden truths buried within the physical evidence, hit that like button and aggressively subscribe to the channel right now so we can aggressively continue to analyze every single clue together. The chilling reality of watching that grainy security footage is the sudden, horrifying realization that the 84-year-old victim was actively being hunted. The methodical pacing of the suspect outside the perimeter demonstrates a terrifying level of predatory patience. He was not rushing. He was waiting for the perfect, calculated moment to strike, confident that his digital sabotage had successfully isolated his prey. The presence of the firearm elevates the situation from a mere intrusion to a deeply lethal threat, confirming that the assailant was fully prepared to use deadly force to accomplish his unknown objective. The stark contrast between the peaceful, sleeping neighborhood and the heavily armed, masked figure systematically dismantling the security of a single home is the stuff of absolute nightmares. It forces everyone watching to question the true security of their own locked doors and the invisible digital networks they implicitly trust to keep them safe from the darkness outside. The sheer brazenness of executing such a complex operation in a residential area speaks volumes about the alleged suspect's confidence. The physical world always relentlessly demands a toll, and the highly organized, masked intruder ultimately paid that toll with a single, carelessly discarded item. Federal investigators, meticulously and exhaustively combing the immediate exterior area of the crime scene, successfully recovered a dark, black glove abandoned near the property. This was absolutely not just a simple piece of discarded winter fabric. It was a massive, unprecedented forensic goldmine. Deep inside the dark, woven material of that glove lay the immense, game-changing potential for recovering touch DNA, which consists of microscopic, invisible skin cells naturally shed by the wearer in the intense heat and physical exertion of the moment. It was the undeniable biological signature of the phantom, a microscopic map leading directly back to the suspect. Before we closely follow the controversial journey of this incredibly crucial piece of physical evidence, we absolutely must address the deafening, distracting noise of rampant public speculation. The internet is currently heavily flooded with wild, completely unverified stories about a mysterious gray truck ominously parked in the elderly victim's driveway for several consecutive weeks leading directly up to the crime. These sensationalized rumors spread rapidly like wildfire across various online message boards, falsely painting a terrifying picture of a blatant, highly visible, and ignored stalker. But true crime investigation strictly requires concrete fact, absolutely not internet fiction. According to credible local news sources actively reporting on the actual police findings, a gray truck was reportedly spotted on various neighborhood security cameras, only sporadically, driving within a 2-mile radius of the home back on January 11th. It was absolutely never confirmed to be aggressively parked in the private driveway, for weeks on end. The actual reality of the surveillance data is far more subtle, significantly less dramatic, and ultimately far more dangerous because it shows the suspect was actively blending into the normal traffic patterns. We must actively ignore the social media noise and focus intensely on the black glove, the single, undeniable physical link tying the alleged attacker to the scene. In a high-profile, complex case of this massive magnitude, directly involving a prominent media family and multiple federal law enforcement agencies, standard, rigorous protocol fiercely dictates that such pristine, invaluable biological evidence be immediately transported under maximum, airtight security to the absolute most advanced scientific facilities available. The Federal Bureau of Investigation possesses state-of-the-art, highly specialized quantum laboratories located in Quantico, deliberately designed and fully capable of extracting the faintest, most degraded traces of genetic material from highly complex environmental samples. Yet, astonishingly, the recovered black glove did not go to the experts at Quantico. In a deeply shocking move that has aggressively sparked intense, nationwide debate and publicly revealed a deep, highly concerning rift within the ranks of law enforcement, Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos made a fiercely controversial, unilateral decision. The primary authority presiding over the local jurisdiction deliberately chose to completely bypass the unparalleled federal laboratories. Instead, the single black glove, carrying the only known, viable biological link to the deeply suspected perpetrator, was packaged and shipped off to a completely private, independent laboratory located all the way across the country in Florida. This singular, baffling decision instantly ignited a massive firestorm of harsh criticism from forensic experts everywhere. The bitter, public friction between local jurisdictional authority and federal scientific expertise rapidly became a tragic, secondary disaster in the devastating wake of the terrifying disappearance? Why arrogantly risk the incredibly fragile chain of custody and potentially permanently compromise incredibly delicate touch DNA by carelessly sending it to a private, lesser-known facility when the absolute best, world-leading forensic scientists were standing by, ready and waiting to process it? The incredibly high stakes of this investigation absolutely could not be any higher. If that single, fragile biological sample is accidentally contaminated, environmentally degraded, or improperly mishandled during the long transit or the subsequent processing, the single best, most promising chance of finally identifying the masked man completely vanishes forever into the dark. The decision to utilize a private laboratory over the proven capabilities of the federal system introduces a massive, entirely unnecessary element of profound risk into an already deeply fragile investigation. In the highly complex, unforgiving world of advanced forensic science, there are absolutely no second chances to properly process a degraded sample of touch DNA. Once the delicate cellular material is compromised by improper handling or inferior technological analysis, the unique genetic profile is completely destroyed, forever severing the only physical bridge connecting the horrific crime to the unknown criminal. This devastating bureaucratic conflict essentially gambles the entire pursuit of justice on a completely avoidable risk, leaving the desperate family and the terrified public agonizing over whether bureaucratic ego might ultimately allow a highly dangerous, organized predator to slip away completely undetected. As the physical investigation fractured under the weight of bureaucratic infighting and severely questionable forensic decisions, the unrelenting glare of public scrutiny rapidly pivoted toward the most intimate circle of the missing woman. In the absence of immediate, definitive answers from the compromised crime scene, seasoned detectives inevitably revert to the most fundamental and statistically reliable rule of criminal profiling. You must always begin by closely examining the people who are closest to the epicenter of the tragedy. The intense, suffocating pressure immediately fell heavily upon the shoulders of the last known individual to see the elderly mother alive on that freezing January night. Her son-in-law now found himself trapped directly in the center of an absolute media hurricane, facing the harsh, unforgiving spotlight of an international criminal inquiry. The timeline of his movements was ruthlessly dissected, torn apart, and repeatedly analyzed by both veteran federal agents and amateur internet sleuths alike. Every single word he spoke, every minor shift in his facial expression, and every subtle nuance of his public demeanor was endlessly scrutinized for the slightest hint of deception or hidden guilt. This is the brutal, deeply isolating reality of being inextricably linked to a high-profile disappearance. The relentless shadow of suspicion inevitably falls upon the family long before the actual truth ever comes to light. Law enforcement officials systematically subjected him to a grueling, intensely rigorous polygraph examination, a highly stressful procedure specifically designed to detect the microscopic physiological changes associated with lying under immense pressure. The stakes were unimaginably high. A failed polygraph, or even an inconclusive result, would instantly and permanently brand him as the primary suspect in the eyes of a deeply captivated, deeply suspicious nation. It would completely shatter the already traumatized family and drastically derail the entire trajectory of the federal search effort. However, the scientific results of the grueling examination provided a definitive, undeniable narrative shift. He successfully and cleanly passed the rigorous deception test, forcefully prompting federal authorities to officially and publicly clear his name from the active suspect list. This crucial, verified clearance was a massive turning point in the ongoing narrative. It definitively shattered the deeply comfortable, easily digestible theory of a domestic dispute gone tragically wrong, forcefully redirecting the investigative lens back out into the terrifying, unknown darkness. But clearing the immediate family only deepened the profound, chilling mystery of the locked house. If the attack did not originate from within the trusted inner circle, how did a complete stranger execute such a flawless, phantom-like extraction without leaving a single trace of forced physical entry? What do you think about the initial rush to blame the family in complex investigations? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. The exoneration of the last person to see her alive violently forced the investigation to confront the absolutely impossible physics of the crime scene once again. The local authorities were completely paralyzed by the glaring contradiction of the pristine, untouched exterior doors and the horrific biological evidence staining the cold concrete of the front porch. The physical evidence simply refused to align with any known, conventional criminal playbook. It was a terrifying stalemate. The sheer lack of physical destruction at the entry points relentlessly haunted the detectives. They were desperately searching for a physical key, a broken window, or a compromised lock, entirely failing to realize that the true weapon used to breach the secure perimeter was completely invisible to the naked eye. The entire physical investigation had essentially hit a massive, impenetrable brick wall, leaving the desperate family agonizing in a terrible, unresolved limbo. They needed a breakthrough, a completely new way of looking at the impossible timeline of that freezing night. The answer was not buried in the trampled dirt of the front yard, or hidden within the compromised fibers of a discarded black fabric. The actual key to unlocking the terrifying mystery of the breached fortress was floating silently through the air, encoded in the microscopic, invisible waves of local network frequencies. The complete paradigm shift required to understand this highly sophisticated predator meant abandoning everything law enforcement thought they knew about traditional residential security. They had to stop looking at the heavy wooden doors as physical barriers and start analyzing them as vulnerable, deeply compromised electronic nodes in a much larger, highly susceptible digital ecosystem. The chilling realization that the physical home had been seamlessly bypassed using unseen, highly advanced technological methods finally began to dawn on the frustrated investigators. This was not a primitive, brute force attack. It was a silent, incredibly calculated, and perfectly executed digital siege that completely redefined the absolute meaning of a home invasion, the devastating, terrifying truth of how the Phantom breached. The seemingly impenetrable fortress was ultimately discovered, buried deep within the cold, uncompromising logs of the local internet service provider. To finally understand the seemingly impossible mechanics of this abduction, we must deliberately return to the chilling, precise timeline established in the very first moments of this analysis. At exactly 1:45 in the morning, the residential network gateway was not simply unplugged or accidentally powered down by a random electrical fault. According to leading cybersecurity experts analyzing the federal case files, the sudden, absolute termination of the signal strongly indicates the deliberate, highly targeted deployment of a military-grade frequency jammer. This highly illegal, sophisticated electronic device is specifically engineered to flood the immediate local area with overwhelming radio noise, instantly and effectively neutralizing every single wireless security camera, every smart alarm sensor, and every mobile cellular connection within its immediate operational radius. The masked figure captured on the grainy neighborhood perimeter footage was not merely carrying a firearm in his generic retail backpack. He was heavily armed with advanced, disruptive technology capable of plunging an entire modern property into absolute, terrifying darkness. This chilling technological revelation finally provides the crucial, missing puzzle piece necessary to explain the deeply disturbing contradiction of the biological evidence discovered on the pristine front porch. How did the victim bleed outside a completely undamaged, firmly locked front door? The prevailing, deeply terrifying federal hypothesis suggests the advanced predator never actually needed to physically break a single pane of glass or forcefully manipulate a heavy metal deadbolt. By utilizing a highly specialized, covert relay attack, the alleged suspect captured and seamlessly cloned the encrypted radio frequency continuously emitted by the electronic key fob resting quietly inside the residence. With the cloned digital credentials securely in hand, the Phantom simply walked up to the front door and casually unlocked it, exactly as if he actually lived there. The 84-year-old woman, suddenly awakened in the dead of the freezing night by the terrifying, unexpected sound of her front door smoothly opening, likely rushed toward the entryway to confront the impossible intrusion. The violent physical struggle that inevitably ensued occurred right there on the threshold, resulting in the tragic, microscopic transfer of her DNA onto the cold exterior concrete. But the sheer, calculated brilliance of the digital siege did not simply end with the violent physical extraction of the elderly victim. The predator clearly understood that the network jammer was only a temporary, localized solution. To ensure his completely undetected escape, He needed a permanent digital blackout. This brings us to the most heartbreaking, chilling timestamp of the entire investigation. At exactly 2:30 in the morning, the internal medical device sustaining her cardiac rhythm permanently ceased transmitting its vital telemetry to the secure medical cloud. This was absolutely not a sudden heart failure or a tragic, natural medical event. This was the precise, undeniable moment the victim was physically moved far beyond the operational range of her localized wireless medical receiver. The abrupt, terrifying cessation of her digital heartbeat perfectly aligns with a separate, seemingly unrelated piece of neighborhood surveillance data. At that exact same moment, a solitary vehicle was silently recorded driving swiftly past a residential motion camera, located exactly 2.5 miles away from the primary crime scene. The synchronized timing of the failing medical transmission and the fleeing vehicle paints a picture of such profound, chilling calculation that it leaves seasoned investigators completely speechless. This was the ultimate, flawless execution of an organized extraction. The suspect had successfully transformed a heavily secured, modern smart home into a completely isolated, electronically silent tomb, effectively erasing his victim from the physical and digital world simultaneously. If you want to protect your own family from these rapidly evolving, highly sophisticated digital threats, please share this crucial analysis with your loved ones right now so they can begin securing their own vulnerable wireless networks. We are bearing witness to the terrifying, rapid evolution of modern violent crime, where advanced technical proficiency is weaponized to completely dismantle the basic illusion of residential safety. The realization that our heavily fortified, deeply trusted digital fortresses can be so easily, silently inverted into inescapable, isolated traps is the true, lasting nightmare of this unprecedented investigation. The sheer level of sophisticated planning required to execute a synchronized network jamming operation, while simultaneously conducting a cloned credential physical breach, elevates the alleged suspect from a common criminal to a highly specialized, deeply dangerous predator. The chilling reality is that the very technology we eagerly install to aggressively monitor our safety was seamlessly turned against the victim, used to violently mask her terrifying abduction from the entire outside world. The immediate, devastating aftermath of the highly coordinated digital abduction left a powerful family completely shattered and a prominent television network aggressively mobilizing its vast resources to demand answers. The victim's highly recognizable daughter, leveraging her immense, unprecedented national media platform, passionately pleaded with the global public for any viable information leading to the safe return of her elderly mother. In a desperate, highly publicized attempt to break the agonizing silence and heavily incentivize anyone with actionable knowledge to finally step forward, the deeply traumatized family officially announced a massive, unprecedented financial reward. A staggering $1 million in guaranteed cash was publicly offered for the precise, verified location of the missing woman. In the dark, deeply cynical world of organized criminal enterprise, a financial bounty of that immense magnitude is specifically designed to completely shatter criminal loyalties, heavily encourage betrayals among co-conspirators, and rapidly loosen the tightest of lips. It is a desperate, powerful tactic meant to forcefully generate vital leads when the traditional physical evidence has completely dry. Yet, despite the massive, highly publicized financial incentive and the relentless, round-the-clock coverage dominating every major national news broadcast, the investigative hotline remained chillingly, terrifyingly quiet. The complete, deafening absence of a response to the $1 million reward directly introduces the final, most deeply disturbing anomaly of this entire, baffling case. The heavily armed, digitally sophisticated predator exerted an absolutely extraordinary amount of high-risk effort, advanced technical skill, and meticulous physical planning to flawlessly abduct an 84-year-old woman from a secured residential property. Logic firmly dictates that such an incredibly complex, highly dangerous operation must be driven by a massive, clearly defined underlying motive. In almost every single historical instance involving the targeted, organized abduction of a wealthy or highly prominent individual's family member, the ultimate, driving goal is heavily financially motivated. The terrifying extraction is almost always immediately followed by a strictly encrypted communication, a deeply convoluted proof-of-life video, and a massive, non-negotiable demand for a staggering cash ransom. But in this specific, horrific instance, the secure, dedicated phone lines established by the federal authorities never actually rang. The agonizing days slowly turned into grueling, hopeless weeks, and absolutely no shadowy syndicate, no organized criminal enterprise, and no lone, desperate extortionist ever reached out to claim responsibility or demand a single, solitary dime from the deeply wealthy, highly vulnerable family. The complete, absolute lack of any financial demand whatsoever aggressively shatters every single established psychological profile and behavioral model utilized by seasoned federal negotiators. If the highly organized, masked phantom did not orchestrate this incredibly complex, technologically advanced digital siege for a massive financial payout, then what exactly was the true, terrifying objective behind the violent extraction? Why violently target a quiet elderly woman who relied entirely upon a strict regimen of daily medications, only to completely vanish into the impenetrable darkness without ever making a single, solitary demand? This glaring, fundamentally unanswerable question heavily transforms a terrifying, sophisticated kidnapping into something significantly darker, deeply personal, and far more sinister. It leaves the desperate family and the thoroughly baffled investigators staring directly into a terrifying, motivationless void, desperately searching for a rational reason behind an utterly irrational, flawless crime. The terrifying possibility remains that the abduction was not a means to an end, but rather the end itself. Perhaps the sophisticated digital breach and the flawless physical extraction were orchestrated by an individual driven by deeply twisted psychological compulsions rather than tangible financial greed. The complete silence from the alleged captor effectively weaponizes hope, transforming the family's desperate waiting game into a continuous, agonizing form of psychological torture. Until a concrete motive is definitively identified, the terrifying phantom who vanished into the cold January night remains an unpredictable, highly dangerous enigma, completely untethered from the standard, recognizable rules of criminal behavior. The complete lack of communication isolates the case entirely, freezing the investigation in a permanent state of unresolved terror and profound confusion. What this case teaches us about the deeply vulnerable nature of our modern, interconnected lives is absolutely essential for our collective public safety. From a purely analytical standpoint, this deeply unsettling investigation serves as a massive, glaring warning regarding the critical, frequently overlooked vulnerabilities inherent in residential digital forensics. The highly synchronized failure of the residential network router and the subsequent tragic disconnection of the vital medical pacemaker clearly demonstrate that internet-connected devices are no longer simply convenient home appliances. They are highly susceptible, extremely critical points of failure that can be aggressively weaponized by sophisticated, technologically advanced predators to facilitate violent physical crimes. We must fundamentally reevaluate how we secure our wireless perimeters, understanding that a digitally compromised lock is entirely indistinguishable from an open door. Furthermore, what this case teaches us about the catastrophic dangers of deeply entrenched jurisdictional ego within the law enforcement community is equally profoundly disturbing. When critical, irreplaceable biological evidence becomes a petty pawn in a bitter, bureaucratic struggle for absolute authority between local agencies and superior federal laboratories, the entire pursuit of objective justice is severely compromised. As a channel deeply committed to analyzing the complex, often flawed mechanics of the criminal justice system, we clearly recognize that highly fragmented, deeply competitive law enforcement responses actively provide highly organized criminals with the exact operational gaps they desperately need to successfully disappear completely unseen. Real investigative success absolutely requires seamless, humble cooperation, not deeply arrogant, isolated territorial disputes that ultimately jeopardize the delicate, crucial chain of physical custody. By closely examining the profound systemic failures and the advanced digital attack vectors actively utilized in this specific incident, we can collectively demand higher operational standards from our protective institutions and implement stronger, significantly more resilient security measures within our own vulnerable homes. Despite the massive resources deployed and the unprecedented public attention generated, Nancy remains entirely missing, swallowed by a terrifying, unresolved void. The deeply unsettling reality is that a highly organized, heavily armed phantom meticulously planned a flawless digital siege, effortlessly slipped through the massive cracks of a highly fractured investigation, and violently erased a human being from existence without leaving a single, coherent motive behind. But she is tragically not the only victim to seemingly evaporate into thin air from the supposed safety of an impeccably secured, tightly locked environment. The terrifying concept of the impossible extraction goes far deeper than just compromised digital networks and cloned radio frequencies. In our very next comprehensive video analysis, we are going to meticulously reopen a deeply chilling, highly classified investigative file centered entirely around an impenetrable, heavily fortified space. We will closely examine the deeply disturbing, absolutely impossible logistics of a permanently locked, heavily barricaded door, and the terrifying, cold reality of a completely empty, silent room left behind. Subscribe to the channel right now and ensure your notification bell is fully activated. Our relentless pursuit of the hidden truth has only just begun.